Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Siyyum on Tractate Yevamot. It is so nice to see you again. I feel like at the end of Moed, we were having Siyyumim every couple of weeks, and now we got to see you and celebrate every couple of weeks together. And this tractate has gone on for 121 pages. I'm Rachel Scheinerman. I edit My Jewish Learning and the Daily Dose of Talmud. And I am joined today by three wonderful and familiar faces to celebrate the end of this tractate. We have Professor Sarah Ronis. Would you say hello?
Hi, everyone. Mazel tov.
Dr. Ronis is a professor of theology at St. Mary's University and an expert particularly on rabbinics. We have Rabbi Asher Low-Patton.
Hey, Mazel tov, everybody. Yesher koach. Woo.
All right. Rabbi Low-Patton is the spiritual leader of Kehilat Eitz Chaim in Detroit, Michigan. And we are also joined today by Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter.
Hi, everybody. Mazel tov.
Rabbanit Fruchter is the spiritual leader of the South Philadelphia Shtibel and also teaches a popular Daf Yomi class herself, in addition to all that she does for My Jewish Learning. So we are so delighted to see all of you here. And as always in these Siyyumim, I love to hear, you've heard from us every day for the last 121 days. I would love to hear what you thought about this tractate. And I can see that in addition to saying where they are from, people are already commenting, and not all of it is positive, and that's totally understandable. So I sat down to think about some summary thoughts on the tractate too, and was just going to share a few of them. Our presenters have a few thoughts, and they are also going to share some more specific teachings from the tractate. We will end with the last few lines and the Hadran and the Kaddish, as we always do. Yep. Oh boy. I'm looking at the I'm looking at the comments, and people are frustrated, but you're all still here. You're here. You're frustrated, but you're here. I feel like that's the summary of being Jewish right there in some way. Okay, so here are a few of my thoughts. Please feel free to take issue with me in the comments or tell me if you agree. Okay, so one thing that I thought the whole way through this tractate is that this is a very strange way to start Seder Nashim, the order of the Talmud on women, which of course really means marrying women. It's mostly about marriage, and because that's who women are relative to rabbis for the most part. And so it's very strange to begin with a most unusual form of marriage, one that many people in their lives will experience marriage, but very few people will experience levirate marriage, this very specific marriage where a man dies childless and then his widow marries his brother, and they produce a child in the name of the dead husband, right? That's a very specific and unusual form of marriage. And so it's kind of interesting that we start there. And the reason we start there, probably sort of practically, is that it's the longest tractate. And the reason it's the longest tractate is because levirate marriage is so weird. But it's still, if you're reading Talmud in the order of Daf Yomi, it is a strange place to begin. It's really getting thrown in at the deep end, which, let's be honest, is also part and parcel of the Talmud experience. There is really no beginning and no end to the Talmud. And as many of our authors have made clear in the pieces, the best way to study Talmud is if you've already studied Talmud. So that was one thing that struck me as we were moving through this. The other is that this, and I've been thinking about this as I've been preparing for Ketubot, marriage really is a very intense contract between two people. And so it makes sense that there would be all these legal issues around it, that conflict would arise around it, and that legal issues would arise around it. But levirate marriage, again, being so weird, it seems to multiply the potential for that, because you've got a relationship between a woman and a man, and then suddenly now she's engaged by circumstances that have nothing to do with her, most likely to her brother-in-law. And so it just becomes very soap opera-esque. And then in addition to that, this tractate, the rabbis bring all of these tangential cases, these fringe cases over and over, and these are even more soap opera-esque. So it was really kind of wild for me going through it. I would agree also. And I thought as I was reading it, I don't know how you felt about it. I'd be curious to hear what our panelists think and what you all think. My sense of it was that a lot of this was highly, highly, highly theoretical, that these weren't cases the rabbis had seen before. They were inventing these cases to understand the laws, which is an interesting contrast to Moed, where it's about holidays. And you get the feeling that they are expecting a lot of these laws to be applied. But in Yevamot, I can't imagine that they expected that these things would be applied in most cases, especially when you get cases where like women have babies and they don't know whose baby is whose, and then they marry each other's sons, and then the unknown sons have to perform halitza with their possible mothers. It's like it gets really crazy. All right. So, and the other thing I was going to mention is that this tractate, and I think this will come up a lot with other people, so I'm not going to say very much about it, but I think this tractate is a challenging one for a modern reader for all the reasons that you all are saying in the comments, that it raises a lot of issues that are very uncomfortable to modern readers. We have child rape, we have child marriage, we have rape, we have a certain amount of contempt for non-Jews. There's all kinds of stuff that can make us very uncomfortable. And I will say from an editorial perspective, I have had to spend a lot of time thinking about how we address this in the pieces that we write, how much I want it to dominate the pieces, how much I want to look at other things. What is the right way to present this material? So I'd like to hear your comments on all that or anything else in this tractate. But now I'm going to be quiet so you can hear from our experts. So I am going to pass the microphone first. Oh, what did we say, guys? Why didn't I wrote it down?
I'm going last.
Rabbanit Fruchter, you're going first, right?
Yes. Hi.
Okay.
Thank you for those introductory words. And, I know that this is my Jewish learnings, really just dived into Daf Yomi, and here's Yevamos, and you never know what's going to happen with like Yevamos being studied en masse by all kinds of people. But look how many people are in the room. Look how much wisdom is in the room. I'm following the chat. And I don't feel like an expert. I feel like we're all kind of like co-creating some beautiful knowledge together in this Daf Yomi cycle. So should all feel really proud. And I'm excited to be doing it with you. And with that, the words that I want to share about Masechas Yevamos, maybe kind of give an overview of the whole tractate. I think all of us actually are finding pieces within the tractate that do that. But what's sticking with me is that sometimes what happened in this tractate is you had the most legalistic back and forth, as I see in the chat, even absurdities, legal absurdities. And then you also had stories in real life. And it just seemed to kind of ping pong, right, between this kind of upper level, just very structural or formalistic discussions. And then like, this is what happened in this town, and this back and forth. And there was a little piece of the daf on 109. If you want to hop with me to Sefaria, you can go ahead and do that. Otherwise, just try to remember it in your head. There was a fascinating statement that actually ra'a achar ra'a, misfortune after misfortune, tavo l'mekable gerim ula'arvei shel tzion u'letokei atzmo dvar halacha. There are these bad things that will happen to three different kinds of people. And the last one is really interesting. One who attaches themselves to a matter of Torah law. That's something really bad's going to happen to you if you attach yourself to Torah law. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, wait, isn't that the point? Isn't it the point of all of this if you attach yourself to Torah law? And the Gemara goes on to explain that actually, if you attach yourself to Torah law without any regard for the practice of that law, then you don't get any reward for it at all. Not even if you're a person who teaches it and inspires others towards practice. It doesn't matter. It's not your reward if you just simply attach yourself to law. And that kind of sticks with you as you go through the tractate. Or am I attaching myself to law, or am I also thinking of practice and the way it actually looks? And I want to conclude my words by rewinding with you all the way back to Daf 15b. 15b. There was a fabulous back and forth about the famed Hillel and Shammai, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and their debates. There was a question: did Beit Shammai practice their own opinion, or do they practice like Beit Hillel? We say that the halacha is like Beit Hillel, so we wanted to know, do they practice like Beit Hillel? And we saw a number of proofs in both directions. But there's an amazing moment where there's a question asked of Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua does not shy away from conflict. Usually it's something you should know about Rabbi Yehoshua. But in any event, he's asked a question about the halacha with regards to the law, with regards to the co-wife of a daughter. And oh my gosh, I'm probably causing your blood pressure to rise just remembering those first few pages of the tractate. But anyway, they asked this halachic question. And what does he answer when he's asked, is the law like Beit Shammai or Beit Hillel? Guess what he says? He says, why are you inserting my head between two great mountains? If I put my head between those two, I fear that the mountains will crush my skull. And the Ben Yehoyada actually says what he's really saying is Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, they're both great mountains. Hillel has the benefit of being the rove, the majority that we all follow. Shammai has the benefit of being wiser, sharper in some ways. If I put my head between this legal argument, they're going to crush me. They're going to crush me. But then the next thing that happens is amazing. He says, Aval ani me'id lachem al shtei mishpachot gedolot. But I will tell you what I know. And I'm going to tell you a story about people in real life. So he says, I'm not getting into the legal argument between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, but I'm going to tell you about something that happened down the street. And as we look at the whole tractate and take a step back, we see the dangers of waiting simply in the legal and halachic realm without stepping into real life. And let this tractate inspire you with regards to what people do and how that can change halakha. And I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about that from each of you. I'll pass it on.
Okay, thank you, Rabbanit Fruchter, for reminding us of those early conversations. I am still curating some comments from below, from the chat, and I want to share a few reactions that are a little different than some of the things that I said. First off, a lot of you found this challenging intellectually, and a lot of you found this challenging morally. And I think that's a pretty common experience. Carla Solzbach, I hope I'm saying your name right, Carla. I know you come a lot. I've seen it a lot, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I apologize if I'm not. She says, and everything gets even more super complicated because of polygamy, which was totally fine, which is true. And Rabbanit Fruchter, you're reminding us about the co-wives or the rival wives, depending on how you prefer to translate it. One thing I thought was interesting, a friend of mine pointed out about mid-tractate to me, is that as far as he knows, and I think this is true, though I didn't check it, none of the rabbis named in the Talmud has more than one wife. Does anyone know of a count? Is that true? Dr. Ennis is shaking her head. That might not be true. But at least we can say very few.
Yeah, it seems to be very rare.
Very rare. Yeah. Okay. William Yodov says this was difficult and troubling, but at least he found that it affirms the primacy of family in Judaism. That family is worthy of serious thought and consideration in these legal texts. It's not just about God or festivals. That there's a huge amount of effort devoted to understanding and creating and passing on family. Elizabeth, sorry, Ben, I didn't tip you off, but if you could find Elizabeth, who spells her name with a lowercase e, maybe she can say more about her idea here. She said she heard a lot of anxiety in this Talmudic tractate. And Elizabeth, if we can get you on, I'd love to hear more about what's in your mind in that comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Elizabeth, we can hear you.
So to me, there was a hyperness to try to give every single situation possible, which is impossible to do. It's like a nervous energy giving, what if this, what if that? It's like when a person is anxious, well, plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. And you know what? Life doesn't work like that. So I found there was that kind of anxious tension which just makes the rabbis human. And I think I felt like a lot of nervous energy with the rabbis. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting observation. I think that's something that students of Talmud are always trying to figure out, is why are they so invested in so many boundary cases? And Yevamot was rife with them. It got really intense. And I think that's an interesting read on why that is. There are many answers to why that is. I think that's a really interesting one. I will be thinking about that. Michelin Brannon from London, England says, it was quite challenging, but I think the rabbis are trying to make a difficult mitzvah something that people can actually live with. That she sees that impulse in this tractate. And certainly we've seen that before, especially I think in like Eruvin and Shabbat, these difficult mitzvot, trying to make them manageable, nonetheless manageable for the community.
Rachel, I just want to mention something about the pushing the boundaries. And one of the comments, I forgot who said it, I'm sorry, talked about that these are a bunch of immature people just playing games, kind of. And I think that that's accurate I know that's ouch, but these are our great rabbis, but I think that's kind of accurate. The idea for Torah is, King David, describes it as shashuai, as a game. The idea really is that the halacha develops by people having that sense of playing with it. And sometimes it's painful when you read it from the outside, because they're playing with people's lives and with children's lives and with morality. But I think that is very accurate, that there's immaturity. And that's when you find kids learn by pushing boundaries and by learning, no, you can't go this far. So it's a fascinating thing. It is immature. It is playing with something that should be so serious, but only by pushing those boundaries can they really create the halachic system that works for people.
Yeah. Some of you know that Dr. Ronas and I went to grad school together, and we had a teacher named Christine Hayes. And one of the things she said to me, probably to us in class really early in my graduate career, that has stuck with me more than almost anything else, is when you are reading the ancients, you make a mistake if you think they are smarter than us, dumber than us, more mature than us, less mature. They're people, and they are as full and rounded and as human as any of the people you know today, and probably more like them than you imagine. And they created something that is sacred and really important to the tradition, but they are definitely people. And that always sticks with me when I read these texts. Okay, let's see. We also have a comment. I'm sorry I didn't write down who said this. One of you said the thing that I always try to remember is that these wildly sexist men are trying their best to be wildly progressive. I don't know if I agree with that. I hear that said. That's a common apology for Talmudic texts. It's totally true that as mentioned at the top, and as will be mentioned further in this conversation, that sometimes, the Talmud is sacred to us, and it's amazing and intellectually stimulating and all of the rest. And sometimes it can be very troubling to us. And then we have to decide what to do with that difficulty. And one possibility is to look for ways that the Talmud was ahead of its time. That is one way to respond. There are many, and we'll talk more about those. Okay, so I'm gonna move us on to our next teaching, which I believe now is Dr. Sarah Ronas, but please keep your comments coming. We love to share them and talk with you too.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Steinerman. And also a giant thank you to Dr. Steinerman, because this was a rough tractate, and she did a really wonderful job of balancing that, naming the complexity, finding nuggets to learn with and from. So really, the final product that you read in your inbox every day is a huge testament to her and her team.
Oh, so I want to give a lot of credit to the authors there, though. I cannot take.
Yes, them too. But their names are on the email, right? Their names, our names are there. So Tractate Yevamot has a lot of really complicated and intricate detail. And we can get really lost in the detail. And I mean that both in a bad way, sometimes you feel lost, but also really in a good way, right? To get lost in the details, trying to figure out the family relationship charts, the who is the sibling of who charts. But as we finish, and a giant mazel tov to everyone finishing today, I thought it might be helpful to take a couple of minutes to just take a giant step back and look at the forest for the trees. So I'm going to do a quick tour of Yevamot. So in the first chapter of the tractate, we discussed the 15 women who exempt their brother-in-law from marrying their co-wife. I know, flashbacks, but we did it. In chapter 3, we talked about when brothers marry sisters and all the halachic ramifications about that. In chapter 6, we talked about having children and not having children and how many children a Jewish rabbinic family really needs to have and what kinds. In chapter 8, we talked about how people of different biological sexes fit into the rabbi's halachic framework of yibum. And in chapter 9, we thought about what to do when you have difficult in-laws. So when you think about all of these topics together, what it really comes down to is family. But I'm not thinking about family in the Norman Rockwell sense, but more in the sense to continue my art metaphor of a Salvador Dali or a Hieronymus Bosch, where things are perhaps not what you expected. They're juxtaposed in new, intriguing, and troubling and exciting ways. When we think family should behave in one particular way, be a particular thing, and then we're faced with a reality that is so much more complicated. And I'm guessing many of us, learned a lot of this tractate asking ourselves, does any of this actually happen? And as we've seen, and as we've already talked about today, oftentimes when the rabbis think with edge cases, the answer is no. So as we finish, I've been thinking a lot about what Yevamot can teach us. And I think one thing, especially realistically, most of us are not going to engage in yibum. So I think that one thing that we can learn from Yevamot and from the rabbis trying to think through every possibility, every permutation of complex family relationships before they happen is the importance of thinking ahead. So hear me out. So often we have a picture in our heads about what our relationships look like or should look like, what our family looks like or should look like, even what challenges should look like. But there's a Yiddish expression, Mensch tracht und Gott lacht, man plans and God laughs. And so often when life throws us a curveball and things don't match the picture in our head, we are completely thrown. But I think Yevamot offers us a really helpful model, right? Naming all the awkward possibilities, the exciting possibilities, the horrifying possibilities, and talking about them before they are reality, so that we as a family, as a community, can come to some kind of agreement or plan for how to react if things don't go the way we think. And my grandmother is on this Zoom and she reads these emails, and hi, Grandma. And she often calls me periodically to say, right, she's legitimately shocked that the rabbis are talking about some of this stuff. And she says, did they really talk about this? And my answer is always, yes. The rabbis left almost no stone unturned in trying to think through what life might throw at us so that we can be prepared. And especially with family, where sometimes it's assumed that everyone is on the same page, so we don't have to talk about the hard stuff. That's where Yevamot says, no, we need to address it all. Now, as many of you noted in your study of the tractate or in emails to the My Jewish Learning team, that doesn't mean that we all have to agree or like it, but that we all have to recognize that the world is messy and complicated and prepare ourselves to live in it together. And to some extent, I think that's what Yevamot is doing in Nashim. Now I know, right, I was in the same class as Dr. Scheinerman. I know the reason Yevamot is at the beginning of Nashim historically is because it is the longest. But in putting Yevamot first, this whole yibum thing, which most people don't actually have to do, we begin to wrap our minds around rabbinic understandings of marriage, death, divorce, family, sex, consent, conversion, and lots of other really complicated topics. and develop the approaches that are going to serve us in good stead as we move into discussions that are a lot more live for many of us today about marriage contracts, marriage acquisitions, adultery, divorce, the things that happen to more of us. And this is helping us be prepared for when the Talmud starts throwing that at us more consistently. So Mazel Tov on finishing Yevamot. And may our learning give us the strength to have conversations with our loved ones about the hard stuff, plan for messy futures, and consistently remember that this tractate, yes, even this tractate, ends with a hope that Torah learning will bring the whole world an ultimate future peace.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ronis. We've got a question in the chat from Karen Alpert. She says, I would like to know about Yevamot today in observing communities, and even more so, what is in place to protect childless widows, which is the benefit of Yevamot despite all the other side issues. So first off, Yevamot, does it happen today?
Yes.
I think it's very rare though, right? I think it's mostly chalitza, right?
In the Ashkenazic community.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Yibum. Sorry.
Yeah.
Tractate Yevamot. Yibum. Levirate marriage. Does it happen today? I don't know of a case. I think it's almost exclusively chalitza in communities that is that. But please, panelists, if you know differently.
I think my understanding was that in the Ashkenazic world it does not, but in the Sephardic world it did at least. I'm not sure it still happens in Israel, but it did. But not in Ashkenazi communities as far as I know.
Yeah, there's a discussion in the chat, or it might have been a private discussion with me, actually. I'm not sure about when polygamy also was phased out of Judaism, which for the Ashkenazic community was around the year 1000 with the decision of Rabbeinu Gershom. And it was still practiced in like Mizrahi communities up until the 20th century, I think.
For people who still live in countries where polygamy is legal, for Jews who still live in countries where polygamy is legal, it still happens.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And Susan Breitzer is telling us, I didn't know this, that Chaim Potok wrote about 20th century levirate marriage in a book called The Beginning, which I actually don't know that one. I'm not familiar with it, but the protagonist in that book, she says, is the child of levirate marriage. And we have somebody on the call who has experienced this in his family. So Martin Bodek. Ben, can you get Martin Bodek, Bodek, for us? I want you to tell us yourself. Martin, can we cold call you for a minute to tell us what happened in your family?
Hello, thank you. Read your emails every day and I appreciate it very much. But yes, my grandfather, who passed 8 years ago, did perform chalitza when his brother died in 1980. That was my great uncle who never had children. And he did partake in it. He's the only case I know of who partook in this super rare ritual.
And do you know anything about it? Was there an actual sandal involved? Who were the elders? How did they do this? Do you know any details?
Well, I tried to get more details because I actually have been writing my grandfather's memoir, of which this is an interesting little chapter of it, but I could not, and I am still in search of information, but courts do not surrender this kind of information very easily in Israel. I could not track it down to its source.
So the chalitza took place in Israel?
Took place in Israel in Bnei Barak. And Bnei Barak systems are not, court systems are not talking to me, but I'll keep trying.
All right. Real part of somebody's life on this call. Okay. All right. Let us go ahead and move forward then.
Wait, Dr. Scheineman, can I interrupt for just 1 second? Because Lisa Hornung asks a question that I kind of know the answer to, and it's super random. So I was just excited about it.
Go for it.
So Lisa asks, what if a potential Yavam won't perform chalitza or levirate marriage because he doesn't care about halacha and wants to be free of any obligations, but the sister-in-law wants it? How do you deal with it today? So when I was in high school, I had a teacher who told us a story where this had happened in her community. And the husband was dying he and his wife were very Orthodox, and his brother was totally secular, and had no interest in doing this when the time came. And it was Shabbat, so you can't write a divorce document on Shabbat. Now, what you can do on Shabbat is get married. So, the rabbis did this like very weird. They found the guy's sister, the brother's sister-in-law, right? Going back to the first chapter of Tractate Yevamot, they found the secular brother's wife's sister. And because polygamy is legal-ish if rabbis allow it, they basically married the sister-in-law to the dying man. So that when the man died, neither of his wives had to do Yibum because one of them was exempting the other because of her ineligibility.
Chapter 1 of Yavamot.
Right? And you thought this had no practical implication.
Yeah, I also thank you for bringing that up. It's an aguna category as well. It's important for us to say there are many different ways for Jewish women to be chained in marriages. If a man refuses chalitza or yibum, this is one type of way to keep a woman chained in her marriage. And that actually did come up explicitly in our daf and gets to this like really interesting question that we saw. I don't remember which daf, which is Yibum kodemet or chalitza kodemet, like which one is preferable, and like what is the direction our history will go in, right? What are we going to push for regularly? Which gets to, I'm seeing all these stories in people's families in the chat and wondering if they have dwindled over the generations. And there's actually responsa literature as well about these things happening and seeing, and I don't know, maybe it's a good segue in a minute to Rabbi Lopatin because it's related, right? Because like, how do the rabbis deal with this, right?
Yeah, fascinating. And Rabbi Moshe Edelman is now entering the chat saying that this happened in his family. His uncle was 12 years old when his brother died, and he was obligated by the family to participate in chalitza and this whole shoe off and the spitting thing. And Eleni and Neil are saying that, as is Jennifer Baumer, that you can go to YouTube and find I'm not sure I'm catching this in the comments exactly what you can find, but you can find accounts, I think, is what they're saying. All right. So let's move to our third teaching, which is Rabbi Lopatin, who is gonna segue us to the very end of this tractate so that we can bid it farewell.
Okay, and I know so many of you will be disappointed to bid it farewell, but all good things come to an end. But Hadron Allah, of course, the whole idea, we'll come back to this. Yeah, God willing. I want to just mention, it was mentioned in the chats, but there's a great Hallmark special, Loving Leah, that's all about Yibum and Chalitza, Hallmark, really good. And one of the, Susan Essman from Curb Your Enthusiasm plays the frum mother, so it's great to watch. So really, really a treat. And I wanted just to mention actually that the interesting thing, there's a case going on in India, not about Yibum or Chalitza, but about there are some Hindu leaders of the Hindu party that disparaged Muhammad because they talked about him marrying a girl and having sex with an underage woman. This is 1,500 years ago, 1,400 years ago, and and if you read newspaper accounts, because it's a big political scandal, they won't mention what they actually said about Muhammad. They'll say they disparaged the prophet. The idea of Talmud is it's open, it's not everything we read, as we know, it is approved by every other rabbi. There are all these folks doing things. And I think a lot of it is for us to say, this I do not approve of. And when it happens to be the halachic ruling, that gets a little bit more challenging. But when it's just one Amora or Tana doing something or saying something, it's meant for us, I think, sometimes to get worked up and say, this is unacceptable. Someone in the chat said, in any generation, it wasn't acceptable 2,000 years ago either. So so I wanted to, and I'm hoping maybe Ancestry DNA and 23andMe, everyone's getting more into understanding these kind of relationships. My mind does not work well, and the brother and Dr. Ronas, that story, oh my gosh, I'm still trying to figure it out, how that worked, but that's in the Gemara. So it's been a challenging Masechet, but as Rabbanit Fruchter talked about, there are these gems of rabbis being courageous, and Ari Goldman in the chat pointed this out, rabbis being courageous, and whether it's somersaults or whether it's really squeezing the truth out of our halacha, that in order to make life livable, in order that women are not agunot, that we can testify that women, that the husband actually died and they're not stuck as agunot. And we know that Chacham Ovadia Yosef, one of his greatest moments was after the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War. He really helped determine missing soldiers, that they were really dead. So their wives could remarry. That was one of the great moments of that great halachic mind. So I wanted to end off, and it really ends off that way, that this Masechet, with all sorts of, where we listen to a bat kol, we listen to a voice from heaven, even though normally we're not supposed to do that, but we'll learn about that next, but in Bava Metzia and all that. But here we do listen to a heavenly voice, not to a ghost, but how do we know it's not a ghost? We have to determine that. Ghosts have shadows, but their shadows don't have shadows. That's the ruling. So on the very last Amud, there's a great story. It's not such an amazing story, but I think it's a powerful symbol of a man coming to testify that another man had died, and this is accepting a single witness, and he gives a whole story. How did you meet this man? The court asks him. We were walking on the way, and then a tax collector, someone ran after us, a soldier, a gais, and this guy took a branch from an olive tree and turned it into a staff to beat back the tax collector. And I said, first of all, Martilo, Aryeh, Yesher Koichach, Yeshar Kochacha. So I love that term, Yesher Koach, that Aryeh, good job. He didn't. So the guy says, how do you know that they call me Aryeh? Well, he's a lion. Aryeh means a lion. So he's a brave man. And then in any case, he befriended this man, and now he knows that he died. He got sick and died. So the question is the court question this witness about Aryeh? But I think Aryeh, this lion man, the man who is not running away from difficulty, but turns around and beats back the gais, the tax collector, or the soldiers, that's symbolic of the rabbis, the ideal that the rabbis should be courageous. And as as Rabbanit Fruchter mentioned, it's scary to enter between these two mountains. So sometimes they do it the way the Rabbanit Fruchter described as giving testimony, but other times they'll say, Lule de mistafina, were I not afraid, I would say this. So you say it, and at least it becomes part of the halachic system, and then people reading it, they'll follow it, even though it clashes with some of the great minds. So that's really, the Aryeh is really, I think, sort of a symbol for how we're supposed to be, or brave. I'm not saying change the law. I'm not saying change, that's a whole discussion, theological, denominational discussion, all that, but be brave, whatever you do. And so it ends off with this question, well, this person who testified that Mr. Aryeh, had died, why didn't they challenge him? And then he gets to a machloket between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. And actually, Rabbi Akiva, we love Rabbi Akiva, but, he's a zealot. He says, actually, Rabbi Akiva is the one who says, there's a little bit of a change here, that Rabbi Tarfon is the one who says, you check a person, you really do drisha v'chakir. When someone testifies this way, you have to do a lot of inquisitive questions. And Rabbi Akiva here says, no, we don't do that. And then we get to, when do we ask these questions, and what kind of court case, and when do we go a little more lenient and let the witness talk and not try to confuse the witness? So it starts out, Rabbi Hanina, this is 4 lines from the end on 122b. Rabbi Hanina says, Dvar Torah echadini, mamor echadini, fasha betrisha v'chakira. The Torah thinks that both monetary issues and capital crime, dini nefasha, when someone is on trial for death penalty, any witness that comes needs to be carefully checked. And it gives a pasuk, mishpat achad yelachem. I love this. One kind of justice, even whether it's money, whether it's a life on the line. So the rabbis said, no. The rabbis, this is an example of rabbis being very powerful and courageous. They say, no, you don't need to do this kind of very tough, inquisitive, determination of the witnesses, because when it's a monetary case, even though the Torah says you do, this is a rabbinic technique. They're afraid that no one, I won't give any loans. If I know that it's going to get a court case will be so complicated, the society will become so litigious, then I'm not going to lend money. And they wanted things to move smoothly, so they said, and also that I won't be able to collect my money. Let's say someone doesn't pay me back and I take them to court, it's going to be impossible. Emily, money changes everything. Okay. But they believed in an economy that works. So if it's going to be too difficult for me to come to court to testify that this person owes me money and I can't get my money back, then I'm not going to lend money. And so therefore, and probably it'll lead to an underground system of lending money that'll be much worse. So the argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon is Mar Savar came to be Kedula Mishkal, Kedinim Amonotami. We have a Ketubah when people get married. A Ketubah is a monetary document about the obligations of the husband to the wife, or one partner to the other. So maybe marriage is Dinei Mamonot, and therefore when you're testifying that the husband has died, that's a monetary testimony, that the Ketubah, about the Ketubah, and therefore you don't need to do this investigation. And another Marsavar, the other side is no, maybe of course this is a capital crime, adultery, and so you're allowing a woman to marry other people. How can you do it without Drisha v'Chakira? So it's left as an argument, but actually the psak is that we do not make this difficult inquiry of the witnesses. Ein bokim edi nashim. And why is that? That's because, again, the rabbis wanted to enable the witness that comes forward and says, I saw the husband died, or I heard from someone else, that we trust them, that we don't give them a lot of trouble. It's just so important. So this is an example of the rabbis, they have a verse in the Torah. They go around that for monetary law. Okay, that's one thing. And then they use that go around from monetary law to enable a witness to allow the wife to go on with her life and not be stuck as an aguna, as a trap, an anchored woman to this man who is dead and not going to be able to release her. So it's an amazing example of the rabbis really, really trying. And I know Ari Goldman in his chat said, where are the rabbis today doing that? There are rabbis that do that. Ovadia Yosef did that. And it just leads to the last line. Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. You might recognize it. We say it every Shabbat after Eid Kalokenu. And it's in several places in Brachot and other places. Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. In the end of the day, true scholars, all of you learning Talmud, can bring peace in the world. Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. They bring peace to the world. But it seems Shenemar only through V'chol Banaich L'mudei Hashem B'rav Shalom Banaich. All your children are learning, are students of God, and your Rav Shalom Banaich, all your children bring peace. And as we know, it continues on the side of the Gemara, Al tigrei banaich ela bonaich, that not your children bring peace, but those who really build Torah, those are the ones that bring peace. And I think that, with all the challenges of a tractate like Yevamot, the idea is that these are the raw material that we have to be the builders of, and things that we'll reject and things that are really problematic. And hopefully we can be those people that with courage, like Aryeh, that can really build this Torah and this Jewish life that can, God willing, bring peace to this world.
Thank you so much. All right, we still have, there's still a lot more that people want to discuss, and I want to apologize that we're probably not going to get to every comment, which is why when we reach the end of a tractate, we say the Hadran, because we are never done learning, right? So we're going to go ahead and move to conclusion now. And celebrating the very end of this tractate. Some of you will be happier than others to see it go. Although you might not be saying that when we get to Ketubot, we'll see. But let's, Dasi, Rabbanit Fruchter, let me hand the microphone over to you so that you can recite the Hadran for us. And Rabbi Lopatin, you will do the Kaddish, and we will give a very short preview of Ketubot.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. You can look in the chat for the link to the Hadran. There you go, screen share. And as I begin the Hadran, thinking very authentically about what it is that I'd like to return to in Masachet Yevamot, really not just saying good riddance, but what is it that's really entering into my soul and my heart and my neshama that I'm going to return to and continue to think about until we meet it at the next cycle. Okay. Hadran alach Masachet Yevamos, v'hadrach alan. Datan alach Masachet Yevamos, v'datach alan. Lo nisneshei minach Masachet Yevamos, v'lo nisneshei minan. Lo ba'alma hadain, v'lo ba'alma da'aseh. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avosenu. Shetehei Torascha Manosenu ba'olam hazeh, u'tehei imanu la'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Harav na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Torascha b'finu. God, sweeten the words of your Torah in our mouths. V'fifios amcha beis Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'satzeinu v'satzei amcha beis Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lamdei Toratecha lishma. Me'oivai techakmeni mitzvosecha ki li'olam hili. Yehi libi tamim b'chukecha lema'an lo evosh. Li'olam lo eshkach pikudecha kivam chisani. Baruch ata Adonai lamdeni chukecha. Amen, amen, amen. Selah ba'ed. Modim anachnu lefanecha. Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avosenu. We come with gratitude. Shesamta chalkenu miyoshei beis hamedrash. V'lo samta chalkenu miyoshei kranos. That we're able to come here and learn every day. Sh'anu mashkimim v'hem mashkimim. Anu mashkimu l'divrei Torah v'hem mashkimu l'dvarim b'teileh. Anu amelim v'hem amelim. Anu amelim makablim schar v'hem amelim v'enim makablim schar. We work hard for these dafim. We work hard for these pages, and we receive a reward. We see the light from them. Anu ratzim v'hem ratzim. Anu ratzim l'chai olam haba. V'hem ratzim l'ver shachas she'amar. V'ata Elohim toridem l'ver shachas. Anshe damu mirma lo yachatzu yamehem v'ani avtachba. Yehi ratzon l'fanecha Adonai Elohai. Kashem shazartani l'sayim Masachet Yevamos, kain ta'azreni laskil Masechtos usfarim acherim l'saymam. May it be your will, God, that you've helped me complete Masachet Yevamos. Please continue to help me to start new tractates and to finish them. All 250 of us. Lilmod l'lamed, to learn and to teach. Lishmor v'lasos l'kayim. Not only to do that, but to keep and to do and to fulfill. As kol divrei Talmud Torah secha b'yava. All of the words of your Torah with love. Uslus kol atanim v'morayim v'talmidei chachamim yamod li l'zari. Shalo tamush haTorah mipi zari mipi zar zari ad olam. V'titkayim bi v'hitalacha tancha osach. V'shachvacha tishmor alacha v'hakitzosa hi tesichecha. Ki v'yirbu yamecha v'yosifu l'cha shnos chayim. Orach Yamim b'yamina v'smola osher b'chavod. Adonai oz li'amo yitain. Adonai yivarech es amo b'shalom. Rabbi Lopatin.
Amen. Okay, and those who wish to stand and say it along, of course, to say this, and this is our learning is bringing God's name into this world that needs it so much to build, so much peace to bring to this world. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba v'alamadu ati lidcharata ulachaya meitaya ulaaska l'chayal ma'ulmivnei karta adu shalem. Ulashachel hechalei b'gavei l'ma'akar pulchan anuchra me'ara ulatava pulchan anishmai la'atre v'yamlichu chabrichu b'malchutei v'karei b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'agalal v'zman karim v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbam b'varach le'olam omer maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnasei v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shemei d'kudisham b'richu le'elam in kol berchata v'shiratam Tushbachata v'nechamata damiram be'alma v'imru amen. And now a blessing for those learning Torah. Al Yisrael v'Rabbanan v'al Talmidei Hon v'al kol Talmidei Hon v'al kol man de'askin be'oraita Torah dibatra hadein v'dibachol atar v'atar wherever you are. Yehi lahon ulachon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamei v'chayei arichei, long life. Umizonei revicheu for kanamin kodam avon v'shmaya v'ara v'imru amen. Yehi shalom rabba min shemaya v'chaim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Ose shalom b'imromav hu yaseh b'rachamav shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Lopatin. Thank you to all of you. Tomorrow we start Ketubot, which is, I think, in some ways where this whole order of the Talmud should have begun, because Ketubot is the main, I think, the main tractate about marriage. So it'll be kind of interesting to go from this exceptional marriage to rabbinic thoughts on marriage in general. But I think we will find that many of the things we have seen in this tractate will in some ways continue to follow us. It will still be largely about difficult legal cases. It will still be about boundary cases and all of that, but it will be in the context not of this very specific kind of marriage, but more typical marriage. So there's a lot to look forward to and to struggle with. And we can't wait to do it with you. Thank you, Dr. Ronis, Rabbinit Fruchter, Rabbi Lopatin, as always, for really enriching our learnings and making this Siyyum intellectually interesting, emotionally sensitive, and really a celebration. It is always a joy to learn with you. And thank you to all of you. I continue to learn from your comments very much. I enjoy when you come talk with us. I enjoy reading your comments. I got more private messages in this Siyyum than I ever have before. Quite a number of them. I apologize if there's some I haven't responded to. It's a bit of a juggling act, but I really enjoy meeting you and getting to know you as much as I can through this medium. And mazel tov to all of us on making it through. And tomorrow we embark on 111 pages of Ketubot. We will see you in your inbox at 5 a.m. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Mazel tov, mazel tov.